Welcome to another edition of Working with Gen Z. If there's one topic which has created more debate, stir, curiosity, and expectation, it's the topic of compensation. And over the years, the whole notion of how compensation has evolved has also changed, considering that we have multiple generations in the workplace now. So every generation is perhaps looking or expecting something different. There was a time or a paradigm in which we said that if I give my time to the company and then company gives me money in exchange, it was perhaps a very fundamental basic view of looking at compensation. But a lot seems to have changed in the working landscape, and therefore there is what we call like a value exchange. In other words, what do I bring, what value do I bring to the company, but in exchange, what value does the company bring to me? Today we're going to explore some trends of compensation benefits which presumably must have been in all services in the top one or two is kind of on the list of an employee. But more specifically, we're going to explore how does the Gen Z look at compensation benefit? Is that a generation which is looking more from the angle of fairness, transparency, something more towards the growth, something more towards flexibility? I think there is so many things that are out there, which makes it difficult for the employer, perhaps, but equally interesting for the employee. And to help us with that is just the guest. I'm very happy we finally made this happen, and I'm delighted. Shreya Bhagwant is our guest. Shreya, good afternoon, and welcome to the show.
Good afternoon, Nikhil. Indeed, we made it happen in 2025. Yay.
Absolutely, absolutely, and it was meant to be, and I'm very happy this is happening. You had some long travels, and I really appreciate that this is happening in the final leg of our year. But this is a much awaited topic and an episode, Shreya, and I'm so very happy you are helping us with this. So we're going to dive into all the questions that perhaps a Gen Zer would look for when he or she is kind of looking for a prospective employee. I know that I have my son who's just joined an internship in LA, and he's already talking about, dad, what should I be asking for, this and that. So I think I could relate it firsthand at my house. But before we kind of go there, Shreya, let's spend a little bit of time to help our viewers and our listeners to understand who you are, your story, and maybe if you can take a few minutes to tell us about your illustrious career and what background that you bring us. Yeah.
Thanks, Nikhil. And again, I also approach this discussion with a parent of a Gen Zer lens, right? Because it's an interesting way to understand this away from the entire professional experience, but a very real perspective to it, isn't it? Thank you so much for having me here. And it's I'm here speaking from my experience um, across 20 plus years, 25 years in human resources. I've had the fortune of working with companies that really have stood the test of time, right? Unilever, the Aditya Birla Group, Siemens, and now 3M. So all companies which are, centurions and more. And the way that all these companies and so many others stay relevant is by making sure we continuously adapt uh, to the end customer, to the employees that we are attracting and retaining, and that's the entire joy of this. So educational background, did my MBA from the XLRI School of Management in Jamshedpur, and post that, really my career in HR across all these companies. And I think I've loved thinking through as we, finally got a date to this discussion. I've loved the process of thinking it through, distilling across just the experience, right? Across employee groups, companies, sectors. And it's been a great process, and I really have to thank you for that. And I look forward to the conversation, Nikhil.
Fabulous, Shreya. I think we're going to tap right into your rich tapestry of what you've seen across industries and some very blue chip companies who are so well known for culture and, of course, their compensation approaches. So let's start. Shreya, help us to understand. How has kind of first. Let's just talk about the big picture story. Like, what is your view and how compensation may have evolved over, let's say, a couple of decades, maybe, way back when we were just thinking about a certain salary and maybe that. may have been the very simplest definition of thinking about compensation, but now so many bells and whistles have been added to it, which makes it both good for the employee, but certainly also a challenge as to how do you remain competitive. So maybe you can spend a little bit of time just talking through there, and then we'll dive into our Gen Z conversation.
Sure, absolutely. Yes. And, the compensation, it's always great to begin this, from the ABCs, the base, the basics. Compensation at the end of the day is to compensate somebody for something. In many ways, a reflection of the contract, the implied contract, now the explicit contract, right, between the employer um, and the employee. The employee brings in, commits to a certain number of working hours. More importantly, commits to certain outcomes, and in return, the organization offers a couple of things, and more important among them, of course, is compensation. I think in the last few years, from an organizational perspective, I think it is so important for any organization, leaders in an organization, to be really fairly clear and well articulated on what is my what is our organization's point of view on compensation, right? Because the good, or maybe the bad news, whichever way you look at it, is if I am paying X, there's always enough and more people ready to pay X plus something, 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 right? So the key is, as an organization, what is the point of view we can develop on what compensation is, where do we go, and really stick to it. Stick to it. Um, Based on what we see from the market data, based on the trends, based on what our employees are telling us, right? Because that is, at the end of the day, the core. The proof of the pudding is in the eating. Am I able to attract employees? Am I able to retain employees? Is my compensation strategy making a difference at the end of the day to the goals of the company? And now you see the bells and whistles, as you rightly said, but really important pieces that have gotten added in, the use of variable pay, right? Sales incentive programs, bonuses linked to organization outcomes, top line, bottom line, other key metrics, the use of long term incentive programs linked to shareholder value growth, the company share prices, etc. And increasingly, the use of flexibility, even in compensation, to make sure that while the total is the total, how it breaks up for employees, for personal tax efficiencies, or for utilization where they see it's warranted, really makes a difference. So I think key, it has to be very core linked to who I am as an organization. What is it that fits in my P&L as an organization? And what is the kind of talent market I'm playing in? Who am I attracting? Who am I retaining? And it is indeed very much this multi-generational reality as we speak today. So comp, yes, but never to forget the value of the benefits dollar in the entire piece, because they help in putting together that entire total package.
Yeah, no, I think you've said it right. It's about looking at how it fits the current set of customers, if you will, and it's about ensuring, like, are we giving them the right value, and the composition of value is what we're trying to unpeel. But before we dive in your view, Shreya, what do you see? Do you sense, having done multiple roles in the HR space, do you sense that compensation still on a most service, does that still feature at the very top? In other words, for the employee, there's so much talk about culture and flexibility, role, career, etc. But do you sense that compensation still inevitably always makes it to the top one or the top two?
I've yet to see a survey, Nikhil, across, and consultants, have unpeeled the proverbial onion as much as they can. I'm yet to see a survey where the reference to rewards is not there from an employee expectation perspective, at least in the top five, if not the top three, right? And what we're seeing really is increasing nuances and shades in it. Used to be the quantum of compensation, and of course, it continues to be very, very important. It's the most important aspect of that contract between the employee and the employer. But I think we're seeing increasing nuances to it. Transparency or compensation packages in particular, right? And in many parts of the world, this is also going to be a regulatory requirement. So, and for a lot of multinational companies, companies that operate across markets, there is a certain base level that needs to be provided across. It's very challenging to be completely, open and transparent in one part of the world and not do that elsewhere. Transparency, fairness, right? How do we communicate the fairness behind it, the thinking behind it, the decisions behind it? How easy is it for me to understand? Do I understand my package, or do I just see, what in India, Nikhil, we would typically refer to as, there's the CTC figure that everybody is chasing. How does that correlate to the money that hits my bank on, on a regular basis? Do I understand that math? So I think yes, but when you break it down to all of this, the transparency, the connect to performance. Here I am, my supervisor, my leaders tell an employee, great job, outstanding. Does that reflect in the overall compensation impact to me? Does that reflect in the incentive impact to me, for example? So I think yes, they will. There's. I'm yet to see a survey where it doesn't feature, but I think over the last few years, we're seeing these nuances of transparency, fairness, performance connect, ability to understand, communication in a much greater degree. And I think that's the sophistication now that we see in the comp and benefits.
Absolutely. I remember, Shreya, many years back when I was in the US for so many years, I remember in one of the firms, the boss kind of volunteered to reveal to say that, okay, I won't tell you how much I made, but I will tell you what X is of a base of a salary of a certain employee at a certain level. And everybody felt, oh my goodness, is this really happening? I mean, it was almost like it came as such a pleasant surprise. But I think times have changed substantially, where the new employees well within the right to ask that. So I think we'll dive into some of that, and let's now dive into maybe looking at the Gen Z generation. And here, Shreya, what we're talking about is, of course, the eldest of the Gen Z is approaching mid to late 20s, which means that they would have worked for at least 4 5 years or even more, 6 years, still approaching line level management, right? But this is a generation which has the access to technology, they have the access to compare things, they have the access to quickly go to websites where they can see the reviews and read the reviews, and Glassdoor and many such firms, sort of portals, which just kind of, say the good and the bad, which could be a double-edged sword for the employer. And let's start there. I mean, just to, kind of from your vantage point, like when you think about the younger cohort coming in, and you can talk this across industries or any particular, just to say that what's the trend line where you see that here, in at least in Asia, where what is the basic expectation? Is it more for the money in hand? We hear about that a large Gen Z population, certainly in countries like US and now even increasingly in India, is becoming more debt ridden, which means that do they want more cash versus options to finance some of their debt, etc. Is it flexibility? So can you talk through, like, what are you seeing for that cohort per se?
So I think, Nikhil, you are clearly the Gen Z guru, right? In terms of understanding the this cohort, the mindset, you know, the way I see it, like you said, this cohort um, has, if we talk for a minute in India, very specifically, this cohort has grown at a time of the proverbial India shining perspective, right? So many different industries coming to play, expanding employment. Um, this generation is the digital native, as you really said. Tech is not a part of their lives; it is who they are, right? And therefore that ease of going in. It's also a generation that has seen perhaps their parents go through the 2008 financial crisis, implications of that, their parents, their loved ones. They entered the workforce, many of them, those who are working around the COVID pandemic time, which was which was really a once in a lifetime, once in two lifetime kind of a reality for most of us, and or even perhaps were in their higher final stages of education of this. Post the COVID pandemic, there's been we've heard these buzzwords: the Great Resignation, quitting, and now the geopolitical sensitivities and realities in many parts of the world. I think at the end of the day, these have shaped the Gen Z expectations. I think, of course, they've shaped the entire workforce, right? Who also lived through all of that. I think most of the, as we, couple of topics really come to play in terms of what gives them what is believed this cohort really looks forward to in the workplace, and what gives I don't want to say job satisfaction, happiness, but what gives the delta, what gives that delta at the end of the day, right? Undoubtedly there is an element of financial security. I mean, I think that is true for every generation, for every part of the workforce, because it's a reflection of I think it's a reflection of the world we live in, and some of its uncertainties, right? So the financial security, which is through compensation, but it's also through a lot of those other benefit dollars and the programs that are available. I think a very unique piece is also around, and maybe unique is not a fair word. More pronounced piece is also around flexibility at the workplace. Maybe it's because of the fact that they entered the workplace around the 2020, 2023 timeline, where the world operated very differently. Uh, it isn't the future of work for them, it is how they simply work and have seen it working. Um, Linked to that is a degree of is the aspect of meaningful work. Meaningful work around different words to it, Nikhil, right? Um, Purpose, that intersection between an organization's value systems and my value systems, the pride I have in being part of the organization, the ability I have to influence the world in the way I think is right by being part of this organization. So I think this whole piece around meaningful work and purpose. And I think the last important piece is also around wellness. And I use the word wellness in a very holistic, comprehensive sense, right? Because that's exactly what it is. It's across all the different pillars, and we can talk to it a little bit in more detail. So I really, it's in some ways, I don't know, do we want to call it a trifecta of these three, four different pillars? Um, and then it's a question of individuals' context, right? Individuals, am I in a certain country? Am I a certain socioeconomic background? Do I come from a place of, if I may say, privilege, which allows me to pick one over the other? Or do I come from a place of looking for security, which automatically, anchors one of them more important? But I think broadly, this trifecta is what stays. And the interesting thing, of course, and I the value that the generation brings into the organization and the cultures and workplace. Every generation shapes the workplace, usually for the better, almost always for the better, significantly for the better. And if you look at it culturally, all these pieces, meaningful work, purpose, wellness, flexibility, surely they move workplaces ahead, organizations and cultures ahead. And at the end of the day, the workforce as a whole gains from it. And workforces as a whole, any employer who looks at it, any organization who looks at it, would see this from a multi-generational perspective, because that's the reality of any workforce today. So let me pause here and see if this resonates, Nikhil, and which aspect you'd like to dive into.
Yeah, no, it absolutely does. I think you make a good point. It's the broad pillars. I guess where we could go next is to double click on one or two of these, because I'd just be curious to understand from your perspective that, as you mentioned, the workplace is even more like most companies will today have at least three generations, if not four in many. And therefore, how do you see like what sets apart that expectation? And you mentioned some of these, of course, like there is, of course, the financial security, wellness. So maybe you can give an example of a couple of them in, or maybe you can say that, okay, what makes up this? So for instance, like we've all heard stories that, okay, if you're in Silicon Valley, you can almost assume that there's always free lunch. And, many companies are doing that across the industries, no more that. But if you were to compare that with a middle manager from another generation, they're quite happy to, trade off with more options, which can vest over a period of time. But that also gives them a runway to say that, okay, I'm vested and I think there is a solid career path, etc. The Gen Z is maybe not thinking as far out ahead, or maybe they are. So we could talk through, in your view, like one or two things that, as you mentioned, like maybe what could be some of the examples. So like hybrid, for instance, you mentioned. So help us with some of that.
Sure, sure. And maybe just a step back, right? And if we were to look at this as more benefits rather than the more traditional comp perspective, right? If we look at benefits, I think traditionally companies have sometimes looked at benefits from a pyramid perspective. Traditional, right? It's not and not that every company does it, but it's a usual, reasonably common framework that is often available. So at the base is, of course, you have all our statutory requirements, everything that needs to be taken care of. And a significant piece is what we would really, companies would refer to as a core benefit, right? Which is something accessible to everybody who's an employee, right? It could be insurance plans, for example. It could be certain retirement benefit plans, which traditionally have been reasonably constant across employee groups. The core is something companies typically have a mindset of saying, hey, this is a standard I provide to all, and then we take it from there. There is different companies, different industries have also looked at some form of differentiation for benefits, and linked that to quote unquote seniority, tenure, um, uh, greater levels of leadership, right? But I think over the last few years, the question has been how do we recast this pyramid in ways that makes more sense for the larger employee cohort, right? Rather than concentrating perhaps any benefits for certain employee groups. So of course, statutory stays, right? Because we are all, companies obviously want to be compliant. um, the definition of core, I think, evolves. The definition of the core benefits, the health insurance that, let's say, an early career employee is looking for just themselves vis-a-vis, let's say, a mid-career or an early senior employee looks at with different quote unquote dependent structures, is obviously different. So I think that definition of core benefit um, evolves, whether it comes to, but I think really progressive employers will ensure there is a base level of protection in the core benefit to every employee. More importantly, I think the progressive employers will ensure that the benefits are also proactive rather than just reactive, right? So it's not just, is it just hospitalization health insurance as an example, or is it comprehensive preventive healthcare checks, access to telehealth, uh, access also to alternative health systems as they grow in popularity, for example. And then suddenly you have a core, but a core, a much more flexible core, if you know what I mean, that allows people to really, depending on what is relevant for them and what matters to them, to really see how that chooses on. And I think the hero in this entire piece is, and it's we've heard this term for a while, flexible benefits, right? Which is typically a certain value, a certain dollar value. A question is that dollar value is available to everybody, but how that dollar value can be used by employees increasingly is available for flexing and movements, right? Person A may want to add up to their health insurance program. Person B may say, I want to get into a fitness program for this. Person C may say, I want to make sure whatever money is there is going into retirement benefit funding because that's my priority. So I think this flex benefit, and I think what we are seeing is more and more even evolving from this flex benefit. And this is where technology and technology tools are extremely helpful, is a hyper degree of personalization, which is now made, which is now available, right? If there was a workforce of one, how would we design it? And think how we would put that together. So I think this movement of that benefit period, pyramid, and providing not just flexibility, but a higher degree of customization, personalization, and then not to forget what we really at the top of the pyramid is what we would simply refer to as voluntary benefits, right? There are benefits that I want as a person, but which it doesn't make sense for an organization to provide it at their cost. However, what the organization can do is uh, give value in that benefit to me by saying, "Hey, we are an organization of 5,000 employees. Can we negotiate with a fitness chain or a fitness app which provides nutrition counseling, Pilates, meditation, all of that, and provide that at a significantly discounted rate to my employee cohort as compared to what I would have to pay if I go on the market?" So I think this pyramid of core, the flex, customization, voluntary top up programs. I think that's the way organizations are uh, making sure that the money on the benefits proposition is of value to employees and value to a very different set of employees. I think another place where we are really, really seeing this, and I'll pause right after this, is around comprehensive wellness programs. Because um, uh, I think employers at the end of the day want employees to thrive in their personal space, in their professional space, be able to express themselves in a way that they feel comfortable. Because the more organization cultures facilitate that, the greater is the engagement and stickiness that employees feel to these organizations and value there. So these pillars, whether it is physical wellness, whether it is the mental or emotional wellness, access to extremely confidential counseling services, addressing the stigma of mental health in particular, and making sure it is perfectly okay to say I'm taking a mental day off, health day off for whatever reason. Providing avenues for social wellness and connectedness. You know, as we read a lot and what's happening around the world, we also read about there's so many of us, there's so many apps, there's social media, there's all this connection, but there's also loneliness. And how can organizations provide that avenue for connectedness through employee groups? And of course, financial wellness, whether it's financial literacy, whether it's education, whether it's the student loan. In many parts of the world, student loans can be crippling and can really postpone life decisions for folks, whether it's refinancing options, educational options, or what can be done best with it. I think I think the benefits portfolio, it is exactly that. It's a benefits portfolio, and at any point of time, the benefits portfolio is being refreshed based on what's relevant for employees, what employees are looking for, and using data to figure out what is making sense for the employees at the end of the day.
So, Shreya, you obviously mentioned there is the bouquet of benefits that one can choose from. Do you sense that do companies, in your view, create a slab, if you will? I don't know if demographically it can fit into every organization, but let's say that, okay, perhaps for this cohort, if this is relevant, then this is the flex core that we give the line level folks, and then we move to the next core, flex core, and then we move to the third flex core, which could be senior leadership, which is looking for something different? Or do you sense that what are you seeing is in more just it's all out there, and then and you kind of choose?
I think it's a little bit of it's all out there,
Yeah.
because if we're providing choice, then why would we want to provide slivers of choice, right? If the company is doing the work of getting the bouquet together and administering it through a good, strong tech platform, What is to say? Like I said, a mid-career line manager has a different perspective from an early career, because one of the things we are seeing is, some of that assumes, Nikhil, that there's still traditional life stages that folks go through, that there are traditional definitions around family, dependence. And I think employers who are embracing this are also embracing the fact that we have to walk away from some of those traditional definitions, right? Whether it is life stage, dependency, or somewhere else. And a good example of this is, let's take a couple of countries in Asia, right?
Sure.
India, Philippines, um, caregiving responsibilities,
Yeah.
very important socioculturally, right? It's very common for example, these couple of talent markets to see parental coverage in many benefit programs. But you move away from there to other parts of the world, this doesn't add up. This is a surprise. Why would we cover parents in a traditional benefit package? So I think that is I think organizations look for what's relevant in the market. Of course, not to get away from the fact, benefits are getting increasingly expensive, even for organizations to administer. Right? Health insurance, for example, sees, I think this is the third year of double-digit increase in administering those costs. Just the same cost, not enhancing the benefit. Exactly, the cost of just providing the same benefit increases. And therefore, I think organizations see value in that bouquet option. Here's the bouquet, pick and choose. Maybe the picking and choosing has some guardrails to ensure there is some degree of simplicity. And then employees, it's relevant for a multi-generational workforce. Doesn't have any assumptions behind it.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I think it's a good point. In some of the markets where I guess the composition is much more heterogeneous, it's that much more sort of customization, if you will, it's required. As you rightly mentioned, that in some markets or in European, it's maybe slightly simpler from that perspective. That okay, there is this, you know, but in Asian context, I think you're right. Like, okay, how do we kind of look at different age groups and even different tier cities and so on, right? So, very good. So let's start just to kind of pull through this and just what, in your view, if you think about companies who've done this well, what are some of the things that like the Gen Z should keep in mind, right? So if I'm a Gen Z just entering into the workforce, what advice would you give to the Gen Z in terms of doing their homework to what should they be looking for, right? Because at one stage, I mean, I think if we look back back in our day to say, hey, that's my dream company, and inevitably there is always that one piece that is that okay, what's your in-hand salary, and that may still be the most lucrative thing everybody's chasing, or maybe in Silicon Valley people want options or whatnot. But I think what would be your advice, Shreya, to think about the Gen Z cohort in general, to say that okay, as they think about joining a firm or joining any organization, like what should they do and not do, right? Some maybe two do's and two don'ts, just as a way to say that okay, keep a longitudinal view or maybe the perspective, rather than saying that okay, I'm going to just do this and not do this. Because very often, in one of my last organizations, we had a partnership with a top NB school, and then it turns out that they were chasing certain salaries, and only to find out that kind of boomeranging for a variety of reasons. So maybe there's some kind of a happy medium. So I don't know. Maybe you you can give some perspectives on, like, okay, what should they do as they think about joining, and things to
Right.
keep in mind.
Yeah. No, happy to provide my perspective with the caveat that this is not advice to the Gen Zer who are
Sure.
sure knows what they are, yeah, right, what they're looking for. I think I think it's important to understand early on in the career what's what's um, what's driving, what do I think are my motivators,
Mm.
right? What do I think is I was speaking to a, again to somebody who's planning to enter the workforce recently, and they were so clear. They'd had some experiences in, quote unquote, perhaps some startup setups, which of course gave a great degree of learning and value. But for this person, at the end of the day, they simply felt burnt out by just the intensity of the work without necessarily structure. So I think it's important to first understand what is the what what is the kind of person I am, what is the kind of um, setup that I will enjoy. Do I like structure, or am I comfortable with a reasonable degree of chaos, which is perfectly fine? How much autonomy? So I think knowing that and some degree of self reflection, and frankly, this holds true for anybody, right? Whether I'm entering the workforce or I think just important pieces to cover. The other thing is, always find out what is the lived experience at the organization, right? Um, Company talks about wellness, balance, all of that. But if you speak to somebody and say it's very common to get a get an email on a Friday evening saying, "Can we discuss this first thing Monday morning?" There's only one way work gets done there, right? So I think important to understand that lived experience. And I'm not judging or saying this is good and this is bad. It's just it's knowledge is power, right? And the beautiful thing in the world today is access to information is democratized, Nikhil, as you know more than I. It is not difficult um, to find out if you really put your heart to it. There is enough and more sources of this information which is available, formal and then also more informal, which allows you to pick up that piece. The other thing is also, and I think it's particularly true today as we as companies are and organizations are figuring out the impact of Gen AI on work, on organization structures. I think look at organizations that are investing in learning and development. Look at organizations which are investing in, because it's the earlier on in one's career that one has access to these opportunities, it helps in building that learning mindset, no matter what stage of the career one is in. It helps to always to spend time, and learning is not it's not an activity to be done Saturday morning or Saturday or Sunday morning. It's also very much an on the job experience than what we go through, right? So I think those are some of the pieces. Going forward, I would really say understand the compensation and benefits. Ask the questions. If something is not put down very explicitly, it's fair to ask the question. Um, Most companies do provide some base level of pay transparency. Most companies do provide some degree of, or even in India, there is some degree of pay reporting that's mandatory. If a company is listed, look that up. That gives you a good idea um, of how things look up at the maybe top end of the organization, but it provides a frame for sure, right? Um, and then the thing about benefits in particular is uh, employers and companies are still evolving the best way to communicate that. So it's still sometimes an old-fashioned PDF, which may not be the best way to do that. But make sure you understand it. Make sure you understand what is the eligibility. Increasingly, companies, not just startups, not just the Silicon Valley equivalents, are providing access to stock programs, but they come with there's a risk, there's a return. Make sure you understand it. Speak to people, ask the questions. Uh, that I think provides a good frame for folks to really, hey, does this work for me? At the end of the day, that's the question, right? Does this work for me? Uh, is the question to really ask yourself.
Yeah. No, I think very good advice. Very contextual. I think you don't want to chase the in thing, right? Do your homework. You want to make sure it fits in your life, your style, who you are. I really like what you said about the startup and the work culture that comes in. And it's not to say that it's good or bad. It's just that not everybody can take up or needs to sign up for that. That it calls for a different kind of you know, uh, uh, input that goes in, and then what you can expect. So I hope that I think we can underscore what you've just said, that look at the different elements, look at what suits you, look at your personal situation. And I really like the whole point about lived experience. That's such an important element, Shreya, because I think we often overlook that, and perhaps at that age, it's easy to undermine something like that, which has such a huge value of who you can become in your career. And so I think that is very good observation and a perspective that you've shared. So just as a way to close out, Shreya, again, let's flip this. Now you mentioned, to keep in mind for the Gen Z, some of the do's and don'ts. Like if you're an employer, right, and I'm gonna just make this across, so whether you're a small company which is slowly growing, or a mid-sized company, or even an established company who's kind of been around for some time, what should they do, considering the workplace is evolving, the worker is evolving, the work itself is evolving with AI, right? You mentioned about refreshing, right? So what are the ways in which some basic kind of do's and don'ts, right? How do we make competitive, reasonably compensation reasonably competitive, yet kind of cater to the working dynamics that are happening? So any thoughts there? Some do's, some don'ts, just as a way to think about designing this so-called total rewards, custom benefits.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that that's got to be somewhere in the top three of, I think, most HR and reward professionals for sure. And why just rewards? I would say broadly HR, right? Because this is, at the end of the day, it's about really, it's what my employee value proposition is, right? What do I stand for as an employer? Full stop. So I think a couple of steps. I think one is to really understand the nuts and bolts of the dollar value that I spent on, see how that fits. There is enough and more data available today to really see, am I in sync with my industry? Am I not in sync? Um, look at look at data rather than just perspectives. Perspectives are good, but when they are backed by data behind it, right, it's even stronger and aids in decision making that much faster. So what is it that fits in my PNL? What is it that I can put together? What is also the organization's plan going forward? Am I in a higher growth trajectory? Am I tech dependent? Am I people dependent? What is my IP here? So all of that at the end of the day comes into the play of how I look into this space. So I think that's an important step. Second, of course, is how much am I listening within the organization? And I'm not just talking, yes, everybody does the employee surveys, all of that, and that's a really good formal way of doing it. But as you know, most of the listening is, it's like ambient noise. It's ambient listening, right? What is coming up in town hall conversations? What are the questions that are coming up anonymously, which maybe reflects the more intense points of view in the organization? What is coming up? Most organizations have informal or company specific social media channels. What is coming up there? What am I reading in the team, Slacks, all of those channels? Of course. And I'm not saying listen purely with the intent of understanding teams, not about, pointing fingers of who said what. Listen to employee experience, employees, candidates who've joined, candidates who took my offer but did not join, employees who are leaving. What are they saying? What is attracting people to us? And this is really important. Sometimes what is attracting people to us and why people are leaving are two different things, right? And we often think of it, we talk of attraction, retention in the same bucket. But sometimes what attracts people to roles and why people leave may be two different things, and they may need to be looked at differently. And at the end of the day, I think it's a question of how much. What is my company philosophy at the end of the day? As an organization, what do I want my rewards package to stand for? Right? And that is something which that can flip every year. What can flip every year may be tactics, the underlying philosophy. And I'm not saying it has to stand the test of time for 100 years, but it has to be reasonably mid to long term, right? From a philosophy perspective. And then how we get there is different. So I think these are important elements that go into that decision process, Nikhil. Right? Obviously, there's always the here and now. There's always the we need to deliver these things. Those are our additional short term realities which we incorporate into it. But I think the really progressive employers who have a long standing tradition of making a difference to their employees and being competitive, I think do these on a fairly live, synchronous kind of a timeline, and make sure they're able to act based on that feedback. So those are some of the things, and it works whether, like you said, I'm a relatively small organization, a big one. How much I spend time on it may differ, but those steps are useful otherwise.
Super. No, I think all very such good points. I like just the fact that you say, hey, have a good pulse of the customer. And it is really not just the surveys, but it's often unspoken things or things at the town hall which are implicitly talked about. And also, I think you make such a good point. It's about the overall philosophy of comp and benefit, right? I mean, I've seen many organizations, I'm sure as you have, which is to say that look, maybe the salary is not the most competitive element, but we make up by doing A, B, C, D. Like we're the best learning organization, and therefore people will just come back because they make learning as a big, big DNA of who they are. And as you rightly mentioned, those are the things which are very crucial to core, right? You don't want to pivot one to the other because that's someone else is doing that, but keep that longitudinal view. Shreya, are there any open resources you would recommend for both the Gen Z employers to kind of look at as a way to see some trend lines? Are there any sites, books, etc., that you recommend or that you feel are helpful for anybody to look at?
So I think a lot of research is out there on a lot of I think around the world, news consultants make sure that data on compensation increases is fairly publicly available. And my and similarly, a lot of the whether it is the glass doors of the world or other forms of social media, a lot of info there. I think my only call out rather than these open sources is they provide a perspective, connecting it to the lived experience of somebody who speaks there, I think adds a richness to that information. Similarly, X% salary increase is great, right? And usually that's the number that sticks in people's minds. But you go to that same survey and then you suddenly see it's different across industries, it's different across how base pay, variable pay, etc. And then that same data point, now backed by a little bit of that underlying picture, is a lot more richer from a candidate or an employee's perspective. So I think my ask would be really, or my not my ask, my viewpoint would really be read behind the headline, read behind the AI summary of the article, go into a little bit of the depth, and the takeaway that you'd get is that much richer. That would be my point of view, Nikhil.
Yeah, no, super. I really, I mean, it's the old, the devil is in the detail, and it's often sometimes because there's an information overload, right? We get swayed, as you rightly said, like don't go at the headlines or what AI is giving us or what ChatGPT may say, but like look beneath and do a bit of homework, go beyond and look at the commentary on lived experiences, because all of that together should, put the puzzle together. Fabulous, Shreya. This has been one fantastic conversation. I know we could go on, but I think we've really covered. I like you talked through the big picture landscape, or you talked about some of the key pillars about what's attracting to the Gen Z cohort. We talked about one or two what companies are doing, should do, not do in Gen Z. So I think I hope that everybody that's listening out, and this is especially for all the Gen Zers who are, in a market like ours where we see there is so much moving around, and there's we've done episodes on how do we hold on young talent, but common benefit plays such a crucial role, and you really helped us to kind of just say that look, think about certain aspects more contextually, more longitudinally, more from your perspective. So I think that all of that really is very, very important for a person across every generation. So I think that's really brilliant. Shreya, you do fantastic work, and just in case people want to look up where to find you, what are some of the places they can look you up?
Well, I am relatively boring and straitjacketed that way, Nikhil. At the social media presence of any consequence I have is on LinkedIn. Happy, of course, to touch base, and it's been a pleasure to speak. I think as always, it's an amazing time to enter the workforce with all the possibilities. Um, yeah, and I wish all the very best to folks listening into this. And thank you so much.
Thank you very much. This has been super episode, and as I may or may not have shared before, but in India, the number one viewership city is Bangalore. As you can readily imagine,
Number uno. See, yes, indeed. I'm here as well. So yeah.
it's Bangalore, Mumbai, and Ahmedabad, but I think this will be good for all our viewers across, and I'm very, very happy we could do this. Thank you once again, Shreya, and I will see if the next time I'm in town, I will let you know. If you travel to this part of the country, it'll be great to do a in-person meeting as well. Thank you very much. Have a great rest of the year, safe holiday, and all the very best for 2026. Take care.
Thanks, Nikhil, and wishing all the viewers an absolutely wonderful and safe year ahead. Ciao.
Bye bye. Oh.